together. Amarillo 9/11 calls are now being fielded in 42 different languages. Harpal told Watchdog.org that Washington pays schools only $100 per refugee student per year. He continues, we have 660 refugee kids who don't speak English, and the U.S. Department of Education says they have to be at grade level within 1 year. It's a ludicrous requirement. They don't even know how to use the bathroom. And while Governor Abbott and the Texas Health and Human Services Commission continue to push lawsuits against resettlement organizations and the federal government for not presenting regular consent as required by federal law, crime levels in Amarillo are reaching levels on par with much larger cities.
Amarillo also has the highest rate of reported rape in Texas. The rape epidemic in this world is becoming pandemic. It's not confined to one location.
Even the Muslim convert CIA Director John Brennan has declared that terrorists are using the refugee system to infest the United States. Meanwhile, Amarillo immigrant Mohammed Maghadam, who came to Amarillo 8 years ago, recently held his manager and another person hostage at gunpoint because he was passed over.
Okay, and that's
for
John Bell's report. You can see the rest of that, the Alex Jones channel.
A SWAT team responded.
Non-assimilating refugees flooding Amarillo, Texas. And, of course, folks, we are not going to have homes. We're not going to be able to afford anything if we have to educate everyone who wants to come here for free. K through 12. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight on this Friday, June 17th, 2016. I'll be your host for the rest of the show. I want to go back and revisit something we were talking about and go into it a little bit more detail. We were talking about this with Paul Joseph Watson, this shooting that happened in the UK. And it was a tragedy. I mean, this is a lady who is a beloved wife and mother of 2 small children who is now dead. But I think there's something else to this. You know, just because people are dying at these events, just like the Aurora, Colorado shooting, a lot of people died there. There was a tragedy there. But we need to look at who these people are and what really happened here. I mean, wouldn't you want to know if your loved ones were killed for political purposes, like a Reichstag fire, a false flag purpose to forward a political agenda, if they were killed by cold-blooded murder? Rather than just a madman who was able to get his hands on guns so easily and we got to ban guns. No. Actually, you know, when that Aurora, Colorado shooting happened, I remember it very well because I was in New York, going to New York to cover the UN Arms Trade Treaty. And it was exactly 1 week before the UN was going to vote on that Arms Trade Treaty. I thought they had a pretty good shot at it. And I went there to do some filming for a gun group, the National Association of Gun Rights. And prior to that, of course, there had been the false flag, and it's admitted, even mainstream media admits that the Fast and Furious operation was a false flag by the American government to try to take away the Second Amendment, to put restrictions on it. And of course, that was precisely what the UN Arms Trade Treaty was about, restricting the flow of arms across borders. And of course, if you're going to do that, that means that you've got to track and follow and record every firearm sale within America to make sure that nothing is coming or going that isn't allowed, okay? So it is a prescription just to say, well, we don't want small arms and big arms going across the borders. So in order to do that, the mechanism for that is going to be total information awareness, if you will, for guns. And that was what that was about. And so Fast and Furious was designed as a mean to say, you know, here's a problem, and we've got the solution right here. The UN has come up with this, and we've been talking about this for several years, so now it's time to vote on it. Well, that all blew up in their face when the federal agent was killed. It was exposed as a false flag. They no longer looked like they were going to be able to get this through. So then, bingo, 1 week before they're going to meet and vote on this, what happens? We have the Aurora, Colorado shooting. And nobody ever asks, when you look at this guy, James Holmes, this is a guy who, when he graduated from high school, he had a 3.949 average out of 4, nearly a perfect average. He was in the top 1% of his class, okay? He had highest honors. He was given a National Institute of Health scholarship just before all this shooting happened. How did this guy go from being so incredibly smart and intelligent? How did he go from that to being this kind of catatonic Jim Ignatowski? Oh, no. You know? I mean, you look at this guy, he's like, his eyes are wide open. He's wearing an orange wig. He's literally wigged out, okay? How did he get to that state? What flipped him? Do you ever see anybody in the mainstream media asking that question? What transformed James Holmes? How did that happen so quickly? How did he go from being a psychology major to some kind of a ninja prepper? Okay, and remember he said, there's all kinds of bombs in my apartment. And they go back and the whole place is booby-trapped. There's all kinds of weapons there and so forth and so on. And where did he get the money for this? Where did he get the expertise for this? None of it made any sense. But the timing was perfect. It was 1 week before the UN Arms Trade Treaty. We needed to scare the American public about firearms, but it backfired. Instead, people went out and bought a lot more guns. But we still have people, even the fellow who engaged us down in San Antonio. Remember, we had the argument with Alex Jones. They were parents of one of the people who was killed in that movie theater. And instead of them asking the question, who or what changed James Holmes? Instead of asking, why did this happen? Why is this timing so suspicious? Instead, it's like, we need to stop guns. We need to make guns go away. And I understand that. But you know what? They're not going to go away. Drugs haven't gone away in 45 years of the drug war. You think the draconian measures that we've had in the drug war have made any change? Come on, people on the left, you know that hasn't worked. Why do you think that taking away guns is going to work? And I got to say to the people on the right, why do you persist in the war on drugs? It's destroying our country. It's destroyed our due process. And now the war on terror is taking it the rest of the way. And we're going to talk about those terror watch lists and what you should really be afraid of when we come back. But I want to now go to this situation in the UK. And of course, this is a very, very important issue. Many of you may think this is something that only affects people in England. Okay, the UK. The Brexit vote is not just a local issue. As Paul Joseph Watson was saying, this is reflecting a mass movement, a mass grassroots movement against globalism that is destroying our way of life, destroying our countries, taking away our freedoms, taking away our sovereignty, removing our control over government to a much more distant location. Whenever you lose your freedoms, and this is, people are saying, hey, how can you support Donald Trump? Because he's wrong on so many different civil liberties issues. And it's like, I understand. We can still fight for some of these civil liberty issues at the local and state level. We have legal mechanisms. I understand that the Bill of Rights and the Constitution are really a dead letter, but they still swear to it. They still take an oath to it. They still pretend that it's what gives them their authority. And as long as they do that, we've got an end. And it's also, if we understand what that document is about, it is the best plan we've come up with yet in any civilization to protect individual liberty. But the further we move our power away from the individual, when it goes from the individual to the community, the local community, from the local community to the state level, from the state level to the national level, from the national level to the global level, the farther it gets away from us, the more difficult it will be to ever recover that. And so right now, we're about to see our individual liberties be removed even further away from us. Going from the national to the international level, we're moving to the next step of globalism. That's why it's important in Britain. They're fighting for their sovereignty, trying to get it back. They've already lost it. They come in and they say, well, look at all the money that we're sending to Brussels, to the European Union. What could we do with that in our own country? They've got a national health system. They say, well, we could spend more money on that. We could help the poor in our own country. Look at how much we could do with that if we didn't have to send it to the European Union. They're writing our laws and regulations for us. They're writing the trade agreements for us. We don't have any say-so over how our economy is managed. That's why it's important. They're understanding that. There are other countries in Europe that are understanding that. Americans are understanding that. That's what's behind Donald Trump. And of course, the people of Bilderberg, and these are people in North America and Europe who worked together to design the euro as well as the European Union. They are the ones who are creating this globalism, who are trying to move it to the next step, have a transatlantic union. Economic first, then political, just as the European Union was economic first and then political, and becoming more and more political as it goes along. So it is very important for them to start to unravel this plan at the bottom level. And they were winning. They were having a massive surge, and it was a trend that had been going on for a long time. The supporters of the European Union were losing miserably in debates. Cameron was failing left and right. Nobody was buying it. They could see what was happening. And at Bilderberg, they're very concerned about it. They're talking about the precariat. They say we have this precarious proletariat because they break everybody into classes and put them against each other. And it's not, the Wall Street is not against Marxism. It was the bankers who sent Lenin to start the Russian Revolution. German bankers gave him $10 million, put him on a train to start the Russian Revolution. This is a known fact. It is a tool of social control. And so they look at this, they say, well, the proletariat is now getting pretty dangerous. These people are going to pick up pitchforks and torches pretty soon. They're going to come after us. What do we do to placate them? They're very concerned about that, and they're concerned that Britain was going to leave, and that was going to start unraveling the whole game. And so then we have this killing, just like the Aurora, Colorado shooting, 1 week before the vote. But they may win with this one, because people aren't going to go out. They're not really seeing what is behind this. This is the CNN story. They say, to neighbors, Tommy Mayer is a quiet man who tended gardens in the small town of Birstall in northern England. But details are slowly starting to emerge. Where are those details coming from? Not from his neighbors, not from anybody who knew him, not from family members, not from people in England, but guess where? The Southern Poverty Law Center in America. I smell a rat. I smell a big rat. Every time the Southern Poverty Law Center gets in here and starts screaming about right-wing white supremacists, okay, you can bet they're stoking this with a bunch of lies. Details are slowly starting to emerge about a man who had interests in white supremacy and apartheid. He bought material, says the Southern Poverty Law Center, from a white supremacist group in the United States. That is not the picture that emerges from the people who knew him. As I mentioned before, a 65-year-old neighbor said, well, it's a total surprise he'd be capable of thought, let alone action, she said of her longtime neighbor. Who said he never raised his voice. He taught English. He volunteered to teach English to foreigners. He had a black half-brother. Doesn't sound like a white supremacist to me. They all said he had no political beliefs whatsoever as far as they knew. They said he was very meek and mild. He spoke rationally. He just did his day-to-day routines. They said, and here's the key, he was an immaculate gardener. He often tended to neighbors' gardens as well. Other neighbors gave similar accounts, saying he was a quiet, tidy, often helped with their gardening. 6 years ago, he gave an interview because they were talking about a program where they were helping people who had been at a day center for adults with mental health problems. They got them jobs in the park, and he said, volunteer work has done me more good than all the psychotherapy and medication in the world. Many people who suffer from mental illness and socially isolated, disconnected from society, feeling worthless, are also common, mainly caused by long-term unemployment. This is the passive guy they're now telling you did this wild attack. What changed him? Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and I want to continue with what we were talking about, this shooting in England, this man who seems to be this docile, not all there mental patient who just said he loved to work in gardens. They were saying West Yorkshire police said they'd seized a number of weapons, including a firearm, shortly after the attack from his apartment here. We've got the Southern Poverty Law Center telling us that he was getting white supremacist hate literature from the United States. And yet the neighbors are painting a picture of a guy who was completely harmless, a man who was a part-time volunteer to teach English to foreigners, a man who had a half-brother who says, by the way, he had never seen any sign that Mayer had any kind of interest in guns or knives. His neighbor said he had no interest in politics. And then when they asked his brother if he was racist, his half-black, half-brother says, no chance. He says he's never been in trouble. He wouldn't hurt a fly. And again, remember, 6 years ago, he was saying, I just love to work in gardens. They do me more good than all the psychotherapy and medication in the world. This is the portrait of a patsy. Who got a hold of this guy? Who put all these knives and guns in his apartment that nobody else had seen? Who is creating this narrative that he is a dangerous white supremacist, racist, highly charged political person who did this for completely political reasons. That's the way it's being spun. That's the way this tragedy